Coming up on this Thursday edition of Daybreak, meeting for the first time in months, the vice foreign ministers of Korea and Japan fail to make much progress on improving their frayed ties. The Korean government lays out a series of measures to ease regulations, offer tax incentives and increase state support to boost provincial economies. Plus, at least 2 people die and more than 20 are injured as 2 buildings collapse in New York City following an explosion believed to have been caused by a gas leak. Daybreak begins now. Thanks very much for joining us. To all our viewers here in Korea and around the world, it's 6 a.m. on Thursday, March 13th here in Seoul. You're watching Daybreak and I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, for the first time in 8 months, the vice foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan sat down for face-to-face talks in Seoul on Wednesday. But, as our Hwang Sang-hee reports, the 2 diplomats made little headway in resolving the historical and territorial differences that have seen bilateral relations tumble to new lows in recent months.
After 3 hours of talks in Seoul on Wednesday, the vice foreign ministers from South Korea and Japan failed to make much progress on improving their frayed ties. South Korean Vice Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yong stressed that Japan should refrain from revising history and work towards restoring trust by resolving the unsettled issue of its wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. In response, Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Akitaka Saiki said his government maintains the historical perceptions of Japan's previous administrations. Tensions are high between the 2 neighbors. Seoul feels Tokyo has never officially compensated the so-called comfort women who were forced into sexual slavery during the Second World War. To this day, Japanese politicians consistently make negative comments about the elderly victims. The diplomatic row has taken its toll on the South Korean public's perception of Japan. Public sentiment on Japan is so low that a recent poll released by the Asan Institute for Policy Studies show that South Koreans perceive Japan as a bigger threat than North Korea. According to the Asan poll, more than 65% of the South Korean public feel threatened by Japan, larger than the 60% of the population that fear North Korea. The figure reflects Seoul's overall consensus on Tokyo.
And that, I'm sure, coincides with all the statements about comfort women, the increased attention that Japan is paying towards Dokdo. And so all of these things are starting to drive up these threat perceptions now.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is reportedly pushing to hold his first summit with his South Korean counterpart. But President Park Geun-hye is insistent she will not sit down with a leader who fails to acknowledge his country's historical wrongdoings. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
The Korean government has unveiled a set of measures to boost the nation's regional economy by around 13 billion US dollars. The measures include easing development restrictions for mountainous areas and designating provincial development zones that fit with the characteristics of each region. Hwang Ji-ae has the details.
The Korean government has been trying to spur the nation's economic recovery, and this time the focus is on regional economies. After a meeting led by President Park Geun-hye to foster trade and investment on Wednesday, the government laid out a set of measures to boost the regional economy. Under the latest plan, the government will help each municipal government develop a specialized industry like film and video industry for the southern port city of Busan and cultural content industry for the southwestern city of Gwangju.
To foster cities with a specialized industry, the government will ease regulations and provide tax benefits.
The government added that it will provide support for business projects that were voluntarily proposed by 56 regional blocks to develop new growth engines. Among measures aimed at helping turning rural areas into economically vibrant spots is the lifting of development restrictions in forested zones. that will allow the construction of commercial facilities in the so-called Greenbelt areas. The only exception for such areas has been home construction. Now, the government expects the measures to boost investment in regional economies by around 14 trillion won, or roughly $13 billion US. It says no effort will be spared to promote corporate investment, which is the key to revitalizing regional economies. The government emphasizes that while the central government has unilaterally pushed for regional development so far, the measures this time around make local governments take the lead in drawing up their own development strategies. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
And during that meeting on investment and regional development, President Park said her pledge for an era of public happiness will be realized when each region in Korea develops according to its own unique characteristics, stressing how the local government and residents of each region know what's best for their own communities. The president said there must be a paradigm shift in which area residents, not the central government, lead the way in creating regional development strategies. And another topic discussed at the meeting at the presidential office of Cheongwade was the government's ambitious plan to turn Korea into an oil trading hub for Northeast Asia. Na Hyung-kyung has more on what it will take to realize this goal and some of the challenges that lie ahead.
Becoming one of the world's major oil trading and storage hubs is what Korea is aiming for. Trade and Energy Minister Yoon Sang-jik said Wednesday that $1.8 billion in private sector investment will go into securing oil storage terminals that can hold nearly 60 million barrels of oil. The government says it wants this complete by the year 2020.
Geopolitically, Korea connects China and Japan, has world-renowned refineries, as well as good port facilities. That's why it is seen as the best spot for a new oil hub.
An annual oil trading volume of $25 billion is expected to be generated from 2021, and many billion dollars worth of economic benefits are expected in the next several years. The government hopes the terminals planned to be expanded in the country's southern cities of Ulsan and Yeosu will help the country serve as a major oil trading hub. Policymakers plan to offer favorable loans, tax breaks, and other incentives to oil traders setting up operations here, as well as eliminating red tape to create a better trading environment in the country. But some industry experts point out that the success of the government project will depend largely on the difficult task of building the financial infrastructure for the trading system. A researcher at the Korea Energy Economics Institute told Arirang News that one of the main problems is that the Korean won is not a major currency used in international trade, adding that reaching the government's goal of making Korea Northeast Asia's main oil hub could take well over a decade. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Now to some welcome news on the job front. The number of newly employed workers in Korea rose at its fastest pace in 12 years in February, showing signs of improvement in the local economy. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The Korean economy may be showing signs of improvement. The number of newly employed workers rose at its fastest pace in more than a decade last month. Statistics Korea says the number of those employed in February stood at 24.8 million. Up 835,000 from a year earlier. The figure represents the largest on-year job growth since March 2002. The country's unemployment rate, however, shot up to 4.5%, a half a percentage point increase from the same period last year. In fact, the number of those unemployed stood at 1.2 million in February, the highest level in 2 years. The state-run agency points to an increase in the number of young people seeking jobs for the seemingly contradicting figures that show an increase in both the number of newly employed workers and unemployed people. Those in their 20s who are new college graduates are now searching for work ahead of recruitment season, which runs from late February to April this year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
At least 2 people have been killed and well over 20 others injured after a suspected gas explosion caused the complete collapse of 2 buildings in New York City's East Harlem neighborhood. Scores of firefighters are searching for more victims feared trapped under the debris. Residents close to the incident have been evacuated as nearby structures were badly damaged by what witnesses say was a massive explosion. Mayor Bill de Blasio, who rushed to the scene, told reporters that it was a tragedy of the worst kind because there was no indication in time to save people. Officials say they believe the blast was caused by a gas leak, as it occurred 15 minutes after a resident in an adjacent building reported he could smell gas. Moving now to a report about North Korea's UN sanctions, which says the rogue state has developed an intricate web of measures to evade UN punishments. Shin Se-min tells us how they've managed to evade bans on their nuclear weapons and missile programs.
Pyongyang has developed a number of sophisticated ways to get around UN sanctions on illegal weapons trading. A UN report was released Tuesday as part of an annual accounting of North Korea's compliance with international sanctions. The report says that the isolated nation has been employing complicated financial countermeasures that made purchases of prohibited products more difficult to trace. It also said the North Korean embassies in Cuba and Singapore are suspected of facilitating illegal weapons deals, including a shipment of fighter jets and missile parts seized on a North Korean cargo ship in Panama last year. The report adds that there is a relatively complex corporate ecosystem of foreign-based firms that help the regime evade scrutiny of its financial dealings. One of the examples cited was a contract by North Korea's national carrier, Air Koryo, to purchase new jetliners in 2012. It said more than 100 payments were structured through 8 Hong Kong registered companies. While the purchase of civilian aircraft is not prohibited under UN sanctions, the report says such unusual activity could be used as a test run for illegal transactions. Officials at Seoul's foreign ministry said South Korea will work with the international community to better enforce sanctions that are already in place. Pyongyang is currently restricted under UN sanctions from shipping and receiving cargo related to its nuclear weapons and missile programs. Importing luxury goods and illicit transfers of cash are also prohibited. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Just hours after being removed by a vote of no confidence, ousted Libyan Prime Minister Ali Zidane has fled the country, defying a travel ban. Zidane was sacked on Tuesday for failing to stop rebels loading millions of dollars worth of crude onto a North Korea-flagged tanker this week without Tripoli's authority. Malta's Prime Minister Joseph Muscat says Zidane spent 2 hours on the island to refuel his plane, which, according to Muscat, then went off to another European country. Zidane has been banned from leaving Libya as officials wanted to question him about alleged financial corruption and other irregularities. Defence Minister Abdallah Al-Thani has been named interim Prime Minister for 2 weeks. As for the missing tanker, details are sketchy at the moment, with no independent confirmation on its whereabouts, destination or ownership. Back here in South Korea, and could a resolution to the nationwide doctors' strike be in the offing? Just hours after Prime Minister Jung Hong-won proposed talks on ending the dispute by March 20th, the medical community said Wednesday evening that they were open to the idea. The Korean Medical Association, very upset over government reforms, which they say will eventually lead to the privatization of the medical sector, staged a one-day strike on Monday and plans a 6-day strike beginning March 24th. That second walkout stands to be larger than the first, as resident staff at Seoul National University Hospital and Asan Medical Center have announced that they will also take part. Korea's 3 mobile carriers will be forced to suspend their business operations for 45 days from today as punishment for providing subsidies to attract clients. The first 2 firms to undergo the disciplinary measures are KT and LGU+. KT will have its business suspended until April 26th, while LGU Plus was ordered to close its doors until April 4th, and again from April 27th to May 18th. SK Telecom will be suspended from April 5th to May 19th. During the suspension, the companies are prohibited from attracting new customers, and users will be banned from changing their mobile devices unless it has been damaged, lost or used for over 2 years. The OECD has voiced concerns that the slowdown in emerging economies may drag on the global recovery. In its interim economic assessment released Tuesday, the international body pointed out capital flight in some emerging economies is shaking global markets, and this could hurt advanced economies that sell goods and services to those markets. The report went on to say the US Federal Reserve stimulus tapering is adding fuel to the risks. The agency, however, added that growth forecasts for G7 countries, including the US and Japan, will continue to be strong, with 2.2% growth in the first quarter and 2% in the second.
Good day, I'm Eunice Kim, and here are your headlines from around the world. Malaysian government and airline officials have reiterated their commitment to locate the missing Malaysia Airlines jetliner as investigators enter their 5th day of search with no concrete leads. Dozens of ships and aircraft scoured an area of more than 92,000 square kilometers on Wednesday in waters east and west of Malaysia, a region more than double the size searched one day before. Meanwhile, family members of the 239 people on board the Boeing 777 were told the final words heard by air traffic controllers from the flight were, "All right, good night." And Ukraine's acting president Oleksandr Turchinov said his country would not use its army to stop Crimea from seceding, saying a military operation in Crimea would expose the country's eastern border to Russia. He called the referendum in Crimea, now just 3 days away, a sham, as G7 nations also said they would not recognize the outcome. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk is in Washington this morning, where he met with U.S. President Barack Obama. Yatsenyuk is due to address the UN Security Council on Thursday, where he is widely expected to condemn Crimea's vote to secede to join the Russian Federation and appeal to Western powers for assistance. Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Ban Kimoon urged the eyes of the world back onto the Syrian civil war, which entered its 4th year on Wednesday. Ban called the situation in Syria the biggest humanitarian and peace and security crisis facing the world, while acknowledging Syria's neighbors, who he said were shouldering the increasingly unbearable effects of war. In a statement, he directly addressed Russia and the United States to take clear steps to re-energize peace talks as the initiating states of the Geneva Conference in Syria. More than 140,000 have died in the civil war since the uprisings against President Bashar al-Assad in 2011. And over in Turkey, thousands congregated in an Istanbul neighborhood Wednesday to mourn the passing of 15-year-old Berkin Elvan. He died Tuesday after being caught in the crossfire of police and demonstrators. A police tear gas canister hit the boy in the head, leaving him comatose for the past 9 months. News of his death reignited anger at the Turkish government and its police, triggering protests in cities across the country, the fiercest demonstrations since June. Police reacted by firing water cannons, tear gas, and rubber pellets at the crowds.
And a good Thursday morning to you all as we kick things off with a corporate-sponsored award ceremony which took place on Wednesday, celebrating the achievements by some of the Sochi Olympians. With the 19th CocaCola Athletics Award ceremony taking place on Wednesday, speed skater Lee Sang-hwa and figure skater Kim Yeon-ah received the highest honors. Lee Sang-hwa became the first Asian speed skater to win back-to-back gold medals in the 500-meter event, while Kim Yeon-ah finished off her career with a silver medal in the women's figure skating event. Meanwhile, short track star Park Seung-hee received the Excellence Award for winning 2 gold medals in Sochi, while her teammate Shim Seok-ki received the Newcomer Award for her gold, silver, and bronze medal finishes. Now, another Olympian was rewarded on Wednesday, but it came 18 months late as Marine boy Park Taehwan finally received his financial reward for his 2 silver medal finishes in the 2012 London Olympics. Now, the Olympic swimmer who won silver medals in the 400-meter and the 200-meter freestyle events was supposed to receive 50 million won, or roughly 46,000 US dollars. But the Korea Swimming Federation decided to use that money to fund a young diver training overseas without his permission. After all the uproar from the fans, the KSF finally gave him the money, which Park later donated to fund youth swimming here in the nation. And now over to some Game 1 of the first-round playoff series between Busan KT Sonic Boom and Incheon Itilan Elephants. And going into the game, KT jumps all over Incheon's defense, outscoring them 23-14 in the first quarter before heading into halftime with a 42-30 lead. But in the third quarter, Incheon starts storming back, cutting their deficit to 59-56 with Ricardo Powell putting up 32 points and 10 boards. But with KT stepping up their defense in the fourth quarter of the game, they barely hang on to take Game 1, 69-67. And shifting over to the VLeague, where Hyundai Hill State defeated GS Caltex 3-1 over on the women's side. Meanwhile, with Uricard taking on the last place KEPCO Vic Storms, let's take a look at the highlights. Now, just a back-and-forth match from the start as Uricard hangs on to take the first set 28-26 before KEPCO answers back with a 25-21 second set win. And just like I said, a roller coaster of a matchup as Uricard takes the third set before, you guessed it, KEPCO answering back with a 4-set win, forcing a 5th set. In the 5th set, it was all KEPCO with Chung Kwang-in putting up 30 points, helping KEPCO take the final set 15-10 and a 3-2 victory. And finishing things off with some AFC Champions League results. We had the Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors draw against Melbourne 2-2 thanks to 2 goals from the Lion King Lee Dong-guk. Meanwhile, Ulsan Hyundai Tigers pulled away with a 2-0 win against Kawasaki thanks to 2 late goals from Yoo Jun-soo and Kim Shin-wook. And with that said, that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Well, it didn't rain much here in the capital area yesterday, but down south received up to 30 millimeters of rainfall, which was good enough to take the dryness out of the air. And for today, except here in Seoul and surrounding areas, most regions can expect lingering showers from yesterday, but it should all let up during the day. And look at all those clouds, but they should gradually give way to sun as we go through the day. And depend on what part of the nation you are in, some parts will will be sunny, some cloudy and rainy. Now, morning lows are starting out in the comfortable side this morning, and afternoon highs should be slightly higher in the Seoul metro area today, but a lot cooler down south compared to yesterday. In fact, it will be 5 to 6 degrees chillier today in the southern parts of the country. So let's take a closer look at those numbers. The morning low in Seoul is starting out at 4, and afternoon high in the capital and Daegu will peak 9, while Gwangju and Busan both get up to 8 under lots of clouds. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like down on Jeju and Daejeon will climb up to 9, and Dokdo will remain chilly at 3 this afternoon. Well, that's all for now, and back to you, Mark, in the studio.
Well, thank you very much, Jian. And those are the stories we have for you at this hour. Korea Today is coming up in about half an hour's time, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.